Okay, so it's been a while, so we may not remember, but we're at the place in Genesis where we're learning about this guy named Jacob, right? And so who is Jacob? If we think about the ancestry, at least the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right. So he's the grandson of Abraham. So and so Abraham. So how, so he was living with his uncle and he married one of his uncle's daughters. And so he's related, it's kind of like where my dad grew up. My dad grew up on this thin piece of land that was between two rivers. And it was dammed by the Army Corps of Engineers and whatever. And then it became land between the lakes. But it was isolated. And so, when we were doing genealogy, before I found out my grandfather wasn't my real grandfather, but we found out that people were related in sometimes 2 or 3 different ways. I mean, because it was isolated, and so you'd be marrying somebody and, like great, whatever, you were related. And then from some other way, you're related. Kind of like Arkansas. So, and it's basically impossible not to unless you kind of leave the area. And so that was kind of the deal with Jacob, right? Jacob was related to his uncle through marriage, but also through his mom. Okay? So maybe Israel was in that little stretch of land and we didn't know. So he's living with his uncle, and what happens? Well, he wants to marry the younger daughter, but Dad says, his uncle Laban says, you have to marry the older one first. But he just kind of sneaks that up on Jacob. And so he worked for 7 years, and then he had to work for 7 more years, etc., etc. So he lives with Laban for about 20 years, and he's finally ready to make his way back home. Except when he left, there was a bit of a kerfuffle that took place. And what was the big deal when he left? He was fleeing from a particular person in his family, right? Jacob was fleeing from Esau because basically he snookered the blessing and the birthright and those things that his dad wanted to give to Esau. They would have come to Jacob anyways because God said they would have, but they would have come to him through a different way, and it may have not caused such a rift in the family. So he wants to make his way back home, but he's not really sure whether Esau has forgiven him. Because when he left, basically the last thing Esau said to him, I'm going to kill you eventually. And so, is that going to be that time? And that's where we find ourselves, and that's basically the recap and intro. So now we are at chapter 32. So let's all turn to chapter 32 in Genesis. And we'll look at the first 8 verses. Jacob went on his way, and the angel of God met him. Oh, so this happened before, right? So we have to go, is this an angel or is this actually Malach Yahweh, which is what this is in the Hebrew? Meaning a form of God, the pre-incarnate Christ. So, and when Jacob saw him, he said, this is God's camp. So maybe more took place than the text tells us, because why would Jacob say that immediately? But we'll let that stand. Okay? He called the name of the place Mana. It's too early in the morning for me to be doing these Hebrew words, but Mananaim. Okay? And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother. So this is really condensed, isn't it? He's leaving, and then, God comes to him, or the messenger of God, and he's also kind of sending an envoy ahead to help prepare the way to meet Esau. Okay? And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Okay, and so he's the ancestor of the Edomites. Thus you shall say instructing them, thus you shall say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob. Okay, what kind of letter is this? How is he addressing his brother? Now his brother is what? Just a little bit older than he is, right? Because they're twins, but he was the first one born. But they're fraternal twins, not identical twins, right? So he's addressing him, but not. It's very formal, and in fact, in what position is Jacob putting himself? Servant. So yeah. So this is more than honoring him. Okay? Let's continue on. I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants, and female servants. I have sent to tell you, my lord, in order that I may find favor in your sight. What does it sound like he's doing?
Paving the way so he can get in there.
Yeah, it sounds like is he trying to like, hey, I'm bribing you, or if it's not bribing, I'm just sharing with you a lot of the largesse that God has blessed me with, right? Okay. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we come to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him. How would you interpret that? Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Yeah, if the last word you heard was, I'm going to kill you, it could be, hey, let's have a giant welcome party, but it could be, right? So he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into 2 camps, thinking, if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. So that's actually pretty shrewd, isn't it? He's saying at least everybody's not going to die if my brother attacks, right? So what his brother would have to do is he would have to split his party, and assuming the 400 men, if he split them, if they're large enough to overwhelm Jacob, everything will be fine. But if you split your group and you're not large enough to defeat, the group that you're facing, then it'll be like Little Bighorn, right? And I don't think anybody survived that, at least on the American side, right? So the first question I asked, remember Jacob's dream of a ladder to heaven in Genesis 28. What is God doing again in verse 1 as Jacob makes his way home? Basically, hey, I'm with you. That's what he promised to him earlier, right? So that's a sense of reassurance. Now it'll be interesting we're going to look at Jacob's prayer, because we know that he was a kind of a bit of a deceiver, a gamester, a swindler, and we'll see that he hasn't completely given up on those ways, though he's a lot more even-keeled about it, okay? But next question, what does Jacob do and say to show that he had a change of heart with his brother? At least it looks that way, right? He's sending an envoy ahead with a whole bunch of animals to kind of soften his brother up. He thinks. They return saying there's 400 men. It may not be good, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's coming with bad intentions. Okay? So I was just having a little fun last night, and so this is a little poetic foray. On parchment old a tale begins of Jacob, now humbled to Esau his kin. Not dear brother of twin origin, but to my lord Esau, such words he spins. No warm greeting of a family is told, no dearest brother in love extolled. But a servant's letter in deference is rolled to Esau his lord with power and control. Not exactly metrical, but close enough. Okay? And how does Esau respond? We don't know, but we will. Okay? So, but we do know what the envoy comes back with and how Jacob responds. And how does Jacob respond? Well, he's responding based on the last stuff that he heard Esau say, which was, if I see your face anymore, you're dead meat. That's basically what he said. So, Oh, yes, yes. Here, have two, one for each eye. Okay. So that's what he said. And so in just a little bit of fun, this is also. Back comes Jacob's envoy under a shadow of dread. Esau, your twin, approaches in haste, 400 men of force not to waste. Such a band by its breadth and might suggests a foe prepared for a fight. And the reference there is from Samuel, where that number kind of lets us know that, that has happened elsewhere in Scripture. Okay? So, Jacob is fearful. He splits his group in two. Why? Because he doesn't want everybody to die if his brother's going to attack him. So let's press on. Because unless something weird happens, he's going to meet Esau, because somehow Esau knew that Jacob is going to see him. So he's actually going to meet Esau. He's going to meet Jacob. So it's not like he's just showing up and saying, "Oh, I didn't know you were coming home." Okay. So verses 9 through 12. And Jacob said, "O God, my father, Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me." So what is Jacob doing? He's praying to God, which is recorded in Scripture. So he's now saying, "God, this is what you told me. Return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all of the deeds of your steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps." Why is he two camps? Because he was one camp, but he split it in two in case Esau attacks him, and he didn't want everybody to die. So in this prayer, it's as if he's buttering up God. Like, you bless me, and you bless me so much that I have two camps. As if we can't fit into one camp, which is total balderdash, right? So, but, okay. But if we don't have a keen eye or ear, we may not catch that. But this is kind of odd. He could have said this without kind of this sort of thing, right? But let's continue on, okay? Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So when he's quoting God back to himself, he's pretty much on the money, but he's exaggerated a few things. And so we're going to explore that, because we want to say what's actually going on and what is Jacob doing and assuming. So turn the page. What I did is I rearranged the prayer so that way we can we can more easily see what Jacob is doing. So the two sections where he talks and he repeats to God what God said to him, they're together. So that way when we look at what he's asking concerning Esau, we can kind of draw a conclusion. Okay? So he starts out the prayer recognizing who God is. Okay? Which is very typical of most prayers we see in Scripture. Okay? And then he says what? I am too small for all the faithfulness and trust that you have shown to your servant. I crossed the Jordan with my staff and have become two camps. And of course, what is really taking place? Well, okay, he has two camps only because Jacob is what? Well, he's not sure if Esau's going to attack. So this is Esau's mind. This is Jacob's mind. In the shadow of looming conflict, Jacob cleaved his people in twin camps, mirroring the duality of his heart. Fearful of Esau's wrath, right? Yeah. He hoped to limit casualties. This stratagem, rooted not in aggression but preservation, is a gambit in the grand scheme of his survival. So before all of this happened, God came to him, right? Just like when he was going to his uncle Laban's place, God visited him. And so God visited him, and now you'd say, well, if God visited him, is God not implying that it's going to be fine, right? So did he need to split the two camps? So instead of saying, well, Lord, I know you visited me, and I don't really know if you're going to protect me, so I split in two camps so we all don't die. He doesn't say that. He's saying, you blessed me so much that we now have two camps, which is a total lie. They don't have two camps. Yes, God blessed them a whole lot, but that's not why there's two camps. So he's trying to deceive God. Well, the thing is, how will God respond, right? Okay, so first part of the prayer, okay, it actually says Yahweh, personal name for God. You have said to me, return to the land to those you brought forth, and I will cause good to come to you. Well, this is what actually God said. He said, you have said to me, I will cause good to come to you. Earlier, God's response in a solemn vow was, I am with you. Of course, good will come to him because the promise of what? All the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. But God didn't say that. He said, I am with you. So he took God's words of being with him and inflated it into something more. Okay? What do you say the second time? Okay, so again, Jacob implored, you yourself have said, I will surely do you good. Earlier, God responded, I will be with you. So not exactly the same thing, is it? So again, he's kind of taken what God said and kind of puffed it up. So, and did God not do good to Jacob, considering, as much as Jacob is a swindler, Laban is more of a swindler. And so, he got Jacob to work 14 years to marry, the woman he wanted to marry. And so, and he even got him to work longer. So yeah. So anyway, so he's kind of gaming God. Well, what's the deal? Now, this is the petition that he actually prayed, and that's on the left-hand side. Tear away from my brother, etc., etc. What's going on? So God's promise did not encompass riches, but a constant companionship. And of course, he did really have lots of wealth, and that was part of the reason why Laban didn't want him to leave. Because before Jacob showed up, he was not doing very well. He was not a very good rancher. Okay, but after he had Jacob kind of manage his flock and watch over them, his flock got bigger and bigger, and he became a wealthy man. Okay, so God did bless him, but that was not what God specifically promised. So he's taking what happened, and then he's kind of conflating that to now what? So what God did not promise but happened, he's now using that as the norm or the yardstick for what should happen with him and Esau, right? He was kind of bringing up this stuff. So now you have to do this because this is what you said, right? Isn't that what kids do? Did any of your kids try to do something like that? Well, you said, and they're, tried to take something you said and kind of weasel it or whatever. Yeah. So same sort of thing here. Right? That's what Jacob is doing. So on the surface, this sounds like a very good and humble and contrite prayer. When you get into it, he's still the heel grabber. He's still trying to grab, in a sense, what isn't his own. Okay? So let's press on. Because he's not a total scoundrel. Or since I talked about where my dad grew up. So my grandmother used to call me a scalawag. And I don't even know, does anybody know what a scalawag is? I hope it's not like a really bad word that you're not supposed to say. But I don't know. So maybe when I go home, I'll have to ask Alexa, what's a scalawag? Maybe Alexa will blow up because it's such a bad word that, right? But I don't know, is that just a southern word? I don't.
We have it in Wisconsin too.
Really?
And it meant
Ah.
a kid that's always doing something different, not what he should be doing.
Ah. Okay, so that's like the old Irish word sleeving. Okay. Okay, which nobody has heard of. Okay, so let's continue on. So 13 through 21. So Jacob just prayed to God. Let's see what happens. Let's continue with the narrative. Okay? So he stayed there that night. And from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. Well, this is all great, but if Esau just comes and kills Jacob, it'll all be his anyway, and more. But this is to sweeten the pot, because that may not be Esau's intention. Or maybe this Esau's kind of, sitting in the middle. And this may be enough to kind of sway him to go, Jacob's actually turned out to be a good guy. So he's kind of hedging his bets, okay? These he handed over to his servants. Every drove by itself and said to his servants, pass on ahead of me and put a space between drove and drove. So what is he doing here? He's spacing things apart so that way, if Esau does attack, there's time to react. Okay? So he instructed the first, when Esau my brother meets you and asks you, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you? Then you shall say, they belong to your servant Jacob. Notice, not brother. They are a present sent to my lord Esau. Same kind of formal references. Okay? And moreover, he is behind us. He likewise instructed the second and the third and all who followed the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me. And afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. Okay. So I think we kind of have an idea. So Jacob actually is very smart and strategic with what he's doing, because he doesn't know what Esau's doing. The whole weird thing about all of this is that God visited him before all of this. So the implication is, I'm going to take care of you. Now, we don't know what God said or the conversation. It only mentions that God came to him. So we're not privy to that. Okay, so we don't want to push that too far. But I would say at minimum, it's the implication of things will be okay. Because he showed up, visited him, made himself present before the journey home. Okay? So in the little conclusion, Jacob masterminded a peace offering for Esau. Under the sun's evening farewell kiss, Jacob dispatched servants, each cradling animals. South they journeyed as they formed a chain of goodwill, bearing their peace offerings. Or at least peace offerings he hopes will be accepted. Meanwhile, Jacob and his family stayed near the Jabbok, a ribbon of water slicing through deep ravines before spilling into the Jordan 20 miles north of the Dead Sea. Across the river's ford, Jacob led his family to safety. Jacob now finds himself alone, wrapped in silence. Okay? Now, if you're familiar with this part of Genesis, you know what happens. But he's all alone. And in a sense, he's ushered everybody else to safety. Okay? So we're starting to see, even though he's hedging his bets, we're starting to see Jacob actually trying to do the right thing to protect his family and people. Okay? So, are we ready to continue? 22 to 32. Okay. The same night he, that is Jacob, arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. So in a sense, this was already described, but this is in more detail. How did Jacob end up alone? Okay? And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel." So how did the nation of Israel get its name? From Jacob. So you think, why wasn't Israel called Abraham, right? Because it was Abram to Abraham, Jacob to Israel. But, okay. So, but his children will be the kind of the patriarchs of the various tribes. So that does kind of make sense. Okay? So, then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." So you see that the name ends with El. That's the shortened form of Elohim. So all the names in English that kind of end with that, if they have Hebrew roots, it all has something to do with God, and originally was a Hebrew name. So, like the organist, well, except his name wasn't Nathaniel, but Nathan. So, so that would mean gift instead of gift from God. Okay. The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. So you could kind of understand what's going on there, right? I mean, so, the people of Israel had all these sorts of things. So when they, after their liberation from Egypt, right? And Joshua has the people pile up stones, one for every tribe, okay? And then why? So when your children ask, "What do these stones mean?" you tell them that Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. So what do you do here? Why don't we eat that part of the hip, Dad? Because, and then right there, that's a teaching moment. And you could tell the whole story of Jacob and wrestling with God, etc., etc., etc. So, okay. Mm-hmm.
I've never understood why God chose to wrestle with Jacob. He said these things.
Yeah, and especially that he lost, right?
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, it didn't have to be that way, but these things are messianic, even though I didn't connect the dots, but let's go through and then we'll connect some of those dots, okay? So, down at the bottom of the page, wrestled, okay? So that's the Hebrew word avak. But there's also a Hebrew noun, avak. So, wrestled, and the noun form means dust. So you could kind of get the idea of, originally when you wrestled, where did you wrestle? What was the result? You wrestled in the dirt and dust flew in the air, right? So I guess we can say that, if we were to kind of make it weird, like, a dust up, right? It would be something like that if we wanted to kind of do the same thing with the language, okay? But, so question, who was the man whom Jacob wrestled? It just says a man, but we know that he's not only a man because of certain things that happen. Okay, and so we'll just kind of stop those questions. We'll go over at the bottom in the middle of the page. So who was the mystery man wrestling with Jacob? Genesis 32 gives us many clues. 1, Jacob, in a peculiar plea, seeks a blessing from this enigmatic figure he wrestles, not the usual gesture toward a stranger in the night. So right here, you know something is weird because he's asking something that you wouldn't ask some stranger who happens to show up. Okay? So this wrestling match is not a real match to stay alive. It's a wrestling match. Something else is going on. Okay? 2, God, the great name changer, changes Jacob's identity to Israel, echoing the transformations of his grandparents, Abraham to Abram and Sarai to Sarah. Okay? So the name change thing says, okay, that's kind of a clue as well. Okay. And then this mysterious figure remains elusive, keeping his name hidden, a trait shared with the angel of the Lord, our Malach Yahweh, who denied Samson's father his name. So we know elsewhere in Scripture this has also happened. Okay. And then, of course, after surviving the encounter, Jacob names a place Peniel, claiming to have met God face to face. So Jacob knew that this was not an ordinary man, that it was God coming in some type of human form and wrestling with him. Okay? And so we would say this would be the pre-incarnate Christ if it's God. You go, well, how can you say that, Pastor? Because the New Testament says that. Okay? Otherwise, I would be out in left field. But since the New Testament says it, I'm standing on solid ground here. Okay? So, so what does Jesus do when he comes to earth? He basically what? Gets dirty. He wrestles, in a sense, figuratively, with our condition. And he allows himself to be beaten for our salvation. So there are some tie-ins. Now all kind of the foreshadowings, they never fit 100% perfectly because, well, they're shadows of what Christ will come, and in some way they point to that, but not perfectly, right? So, like Isaac and the ram, right, with Abraham. So Jesus wasn't really an animal, but it pointed forward to a sacrifice that he will do in the future. Though his sacrifice, did a lot more than any animal could ever do. So there are these things that touch in some way, and then together we get a giant mosaic of Christ. Okay, does that help in some way, Bob? Okay. Okay. But what we can say for certain is that Jacob knows this is God. And it's kind of like Abraham. When God shows up to Abraham in the burning bush, how is God first addressed? As an angel of the Lord. Later on, he's actually referenced as God. And then when Moses says, when I go to Pharaoh, what should I say your name is? Because he's going to say, who told you to do this? I have to give some name. And so the name that God gives him is the Hebrew equivalent of I am, which is a statement of existence. Okay? So there we have it. He wrestled in the night and he won, right? But, God allowed him to win. But so his name changes from heel holder or grabber to wrestler with God is basically kind of what his name means. Are we ready for chapter 33?
Wait, what is the significance of his hip being out of joint?
That I cannot tell you. I mean, probably some significance, but I have not really looked into it. But every time, we do know that every time they wouldn't eat it, it would be a good object lesson and point back to it. But was there some theological significance of that joint? I cannot tell you.
Well,
Yeah.
it seems to me in literature, there's always a theme built on something. And this is used over and over.
There probably is some something. I just really have never looked into it. So I just don't want to, like make something up, right? Yeah. It's bad if a pastor makes something up. Now I could tell you, I think, but, I don't even know enough to say I think on that particular one. So, yeah. Okay. It's like, did any of you guys ever take the GRE test? And it's math and English. So when I took it, it was automated. And this is just as an example about guessing on stuff, right? So on the English, I was like, piece of cake, did really well. But on the math, I get so far, and then there would be some sort of math problem or equation. I'm like, it's really bad it's bad if you don't know the answer. It's bad when you don't even know what the question is asking. And I would go, and you guess. Well, I got that one wrong because I could tell, and it got easier. And so the test is kind of adaptive. When you mess up, it goes back, and then it gets easier and continues to get harder till you mess up. And so it kind of has, through repetition, it kind of knows what level you are in math and English. So, and hey, I still do this, so I know I'm bad at math. Okay, chapter 33, verses 1 through 3. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming. What do you think God was doing with Jacob? Keeping Jacob busy, and now Esau shows up. And 400 men with him. And Jacob was slaughtered and all his family, and the prophecy did not become true. The end. No, that's not what happened. Okay? But, right? It can happen because why? Because of the promise. So God would intervene even if Esau did try to do that. Just like he intervened with Noah in the flood. He intervened at various places in some extreme ways to ensure the promise, right, continued. Okay? So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. And he put the servants and their children in front. Then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. So he's kind of putting his family behind him in kind of different levels. So if there is an attack, right? So the wife he loves the most will have more protection. His youngest son will be more protected. So, there is some reason to how he's doing this, okay? Or you could say, we don't know, maybe he's just doing this to ensure that the youngest children are kept the safest, because Jacob is the youngest. So it may not have to do with Rachel and Leah. That could just be me thinking, we know he likes Rachel, but he doesn't like Leah as much, right? So he does this with his children. Then what happens? He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. So now, right? Now, this is the man Jacob should have always been, right? Because what is he doing? He himself is going alone to meet his brother. Now he's bowing 7 times and he's showing signs of respect, but he's not using any of his family or anything else as kind of walls of protection. And what he has been, which is kind of what he did when he split the group in 2, he's kind of ensuring survival. But he was ensuring survival of what? The clan, his family group, not necessarily himself. And now we can see. So he's not a scalawag. He's not a sleeving. Okay? Right. So that is good. That's heartening. It still doesn't mean that Esau still may kill him or try to, but Jacob is doing the right thing, and he's trying to work peace out. If there's going to be something to be done, he doesn't want the rest of his family members to become casualties if he could help it. So,
Identical twins or just
fraternal twins. So remember, Esau was kind of like the hairy daddy's boy, went hunting and cooked the stew. Jacob was kind of a mama's boy, not hairy and like kind of, So, um, so in today's world, our world's so messed up, they would probably try to make Jacob transgender or something, right? Just because maybe as a kid he may have one time said, "Wow, I wish I was a girl," and there you have it. So, but I mean, I said that when I was growing up, because and they probably wanted to be a boy because they had to wash all the dishes, but I had to do all the outside work and mow the lawn and work in the garden and take rocks out of the garden and all that stuff. They weren't watching me when I was doing that, so they go, "Man, life's a lot easier if you're a boy." Whereas and they go, "And he doesn't have to wash dishes." So, what's that? Well, I don't know, but I don't know if I learned anything. But so, so you're kind of two different temperaments and that sort of thing. And so that's the reason why Mom kind of liked Jacob and Dad kind of liked Esau. Okay? So it would kind of be like growing up and one son likes to fish and you're a fisherman, but the other son, he'd rather cook in the kitchen. Right? So, okay, well, let's press on. Okay? Let's look at verses 4 through 11. Are we good so far? Okay. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. So all the stuff. Now this sounds like he was buttering Esau up, but doesn't this sound like that even if Esau wasn't really happy to see his brother, I don't think he would have reacted this way. So it seems as if this is really genuine. And so during the 20 years, Esau has had a change of heart. Okay? And Jacob didn't know what Esau was thinking, so. Okay. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. Why are they all bowing down before Esau? I mean, he's Jacob's brother. Because Jacob did that, right? So that's kind of the protocol. He's the patriarch and he does that, so not to do it would be disrespectful. It doesn't matter if you think Esau's a scoundrel or not, right? So this is kind of the culture and protocol of the day. Okay. At last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" Right? He said, 400 guys? Are you sure you weren't wanting to kill me? But he asks it in a slightly different way, right? But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. Wow. So they have both done well. Jacob said, "No, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God." I hope that's sincere. Because "And you have accepted me. Please accept my blessings that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me and because I have enough." Well, all that is true, isn't it? Yeah. Thus he urged him, and he took it. Then Esau said, "Let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you." Okay, so Esau saying, "Let's journey together, brother," etc., etc., etc. So that's kind of where we are, right? So is this a good meeting? Yes. Did what Jacob feared happen? No, right? And he even said, "Hey, kind of take all this stuff, and I don't need it. I'm doing well too," right? So, this is a really kind of a good thing, and he's still showing deference to his older brother more than what's really necessary. I mean, you should show deference because he's the older one, and that's how it was supposed to work. But this is kind of way more than kind of the regular relationship. And this is because Jacob wants to make sure that Esau knows he's not disrespecting him. Because wasn't he disrespecting him big time when he kind of swindled the stuff that, that he took that Esau was supposed to receive? So, yeah, not good at all. So let's continue on, because he says, oh, it was as if the face of God. And is that true, or is it partly true, or is he just saying that because he still has a little bit of swindler in him? I don't know, because it doesn't tell us the mind of Jacob. So we're going to have to see what he does. So let's press on. Verses 12 through 20. Okay. Oh, well, I read verse 12. Okay, so Esau said, hey, let's go together. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. So what Jacob is saying is, I have traveled farther here to meet you, and the flocks need rest. So that's something reasonable. Okay, it's not totally wacky. It's believable. Okay. So, let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir. So Esau said, let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built himself a house, and made booths for his livestock. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. Okay. But what did he just tell his brother? Yeah.
He lied to him, really.
Well, it certainly seems that way. I mean, it's something weird could have happened, and, oh, well, something came up, but the text doesn't say that. But it's certainly, that would be the most obvious conclusion, that, well, he said one thing and did another. And there is no explanation as to why he didn't do what he said. So, the first thing is say, well, he deceived or lied to his brother once again. Right? No, it's not as bad as before, but still, he could have, right? So, yeah, this is weird. Okay? And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way to Padam Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought 100 pieces of money, and for 100 pieces of money, the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it I have to take my glasses off, El Elohe Israel. Okay? And we'll stop there. So, what can we conclude about Jacob? Is he the same man that he was at 18, or however old he was when he left fleeing Esau? I would say no. But the heel grabber, the grabber or the deceiver part of Jacob is not completely gone. I mean, I would have thought that he would have at least went to Seir and, hey, and visited and then leave. If that way there's not anything weird in the air, right? Because it's like, well, you said you were going to come and see me and you never did, right? It's not like today, well, let me just text him. You can't do that sort of thing. So, and it looks as if he deceived his brother. And it could be because maybe he's still not sure. Despite everything Esau said and everything he had done, maybe Jacob is still thinking, but if I'm alone with Esau, maybe, who knows? So, I'm just saying these are possibilities, but all we know is that he said one thing and did another, and it seems like Jacob hasn't completely changed. But it seems as if Esau had. At least it seems. Okay? So that's where we'll stop for today, and we'll continue on and see what happens, right? But so what can we learn from these patriarchs when you just kind of look at their lives in kind of a broad sweep, right? Yes, exactly. So Sarah, humans messed up as we are, yes, they don't always do the right thing. In fact, many times they do the wrong thing. And so God had blessed Jacob way beyond what he said. He said, I will be with you. And of course, but God blessed him materially very well. And yet Jacob kind of takes that and says, oh, well, this is now the new norm. And kind of throws that back at God when God visited him before, basically by his presence saying, everything's going to be fine. So he's acting in a way. So from an earthly perspective, he's doing all the right things, ensuring that his family doesn't die. But what his actions actually show that he doesn't have a whole lot of faith that God will deliver him. Because he says, oh yeah, I know God will, just like Abraham, I know God, in the abstract, God will do this and God will bless me. But when it comes down to it, well, it's always hard in the concrete, isn't it?
Appears that he doesn't believe in Esau still. That Esau went on, Jacob stops, and he thinks, well, I'm at peace because my brother but I still don't fully trust him, so we're going to stop here.
But even if he didn't, even if Esau wasn't, the promise was still that through Jacob, all the families of the world would be blessed. So God would still protect Jacob even if Esau became a wild man, right? And so,
It's a trust. You don't think
yeah, so we find that Jacob is really like his grandfather. He believes, but he doesn't. Lord, I believe, help me in my unbelief. And in some way, that's all of us. So we can't throw stones too far at him. We have to recognize that we are both people ourselves, which is why we always need to repent.
Isn't the
Betty?
ulterior motive here a savior? Isn't that eventually where they're heading?
Yes.
God knew
Yes.
we were sinful, and this is the start of the promise, as far as I recall.
Yeah, I mean, it started before, but you're right. This promise is kind of weaving its way through history, through individual promises God made, through particular family and a nation and all that sort of thing. So, yes. And the thing that we can learn is that it all came true despite everything God's people did.
What year would this be? Like
Oh,
500 BC or
I don't know.
BC or what?
No, it's 1,000 something, 2,000 something BC, but I couldn't tell you. I mean, I could look it up, but I don't know off the top of my head. But it's pretty far back. So, yeah. Well, let's close with prayer, shall we? Our Father, the lives of your saints, as recorded in the Old Testament, really in many ways are sketchy, and they have a checkered past. But that is all of us. And yet you still love them. You still kept your promises. You went above and beyond with Jacob when he didn't deserve it. And in that sense, we could see what you do with us through Christ. Give us such faith. And when we believe and at the same time don't believe as Jacob did, turn our hearts toward you that we may remain faithful because of what you do to keep us that way. In our Savior's name we pray. Amen.